Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Heidi, we've got a great show today, and we are going to be talking about finding hope again after multiple losses.
Absolutely, and this is something that is near and dear to both of our hearts because, you know, my brother died and my cousin together when I was 20. They both died in a car accident at 17. And my father died 3 years ago, and I know that you've lost your son, your parents, and your spouse.
And siblings.
And your siblings.
2 siblings. Yeah,
exactly. So you've had a lot of multiple losses. So, but you know, before we introduce our guests and talk more about this topic, I just wanted to remind, you know, our audience and tell you, for those of you that don't know, that you have a new book coming out. And can you tell us a little bit about it?
I do. It's called Open to Love, The Secrets of Senior Dating. I wrote it with my fiance, and it is for those people who've had a loss and are ready to think about getting into a new relationship. It's the ups and downs of how a new relationship is. We tell our story and lots of stories from our clients. It's going to be an important book, I think, in the field. We've gotten great reviews. And it comes out on Valentine's Day, and you can pre-order it at Open to Hope, or you can go to the Dating Doctor's site. And you can, as I said, pre-order, and 100% of the proceeds, Heidi, go to the Open to Hope Foundation. So we continue our work of helping people find hope after loss.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Mom. So go order that. February 14th is the pub date. Okay, so our guests today are Jennifer O'Brien and Dr. Barbara Hopkinson. And they've both been on our shows before, so you can go and see other shows they've done on different topics. And let's see, I'll start by introducing Jennifer. Jennifer is no stranger to grief. She has lost her brother, husband, and both parents. For over 35 years, she has been a practice management consultant to physicians, serving as interim leader for several large physician organizations. Jennifer kept an art journal as a form of self-care during her late husband's 22-month illness. It was published as The Hospice Doctor's Widow, a Journal. This book won numerous awards, including a Nautilus Silver Award in the Death and Dying Grief and Loss category. Welcome to our show, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you.
And next to Jennifer is Dr. Barbara Hopkinson. Barbara is a speaker and best-selling author who remains resilient after the loss of 3 children, her husband, and her parents. Barbara is the founder of A Butterfly's Journey, a nonprofit for resilience after loss. She also founded a Compassionate Friends chapter in Massachusetts. She has received several awards, including an honorary doctorate in humanitarianism and a President Biden Lifetime Achievement Award. She is also the author of the memoir, A Butterfly's Journey, Healing Grief After the Loss of a Child. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So great to have you both on the show, and a lot of losses.
Yes.
and dealing with multiple loss. I know a lot of people watching the show are wondering about that. And, you know, we were talking earlier about comparisons. I mean, what is worse? Is it worse to lose a parent? Is it worse to lose a child? Is it, you know?
And before we start with that, because I like that conversation, but I want to know a little bit more about their losses and the time frame, so I can get some context.
Right.
So I don't know, Barbara, do you want to start with that?
Sure. I think the early losses were my parents died my father when I was 32, my mother when I was 47. And then I got married, and several years later had a miscarriage, then had 2 healthy boys, and then when they were 6 and 4, my 3rd son was stillborn, Robbie. And then Brent and Brad grew up, and Brent went off to be an Army pilot at Arizona State University, Army ROTC, and died in a motorcycle accident at 21. And I did have an infant brother who passed too, that didn't get to know him, but kind of knew him through my parents. But yeah, and then so my 30-year marriage fell apart after my older son died, and I got married again and was very happy, and was married 12 years to my second husband, Jim, and he passed away on his way to work 6 years ago, and Widowmaker heart attack.
Wow,
So,
that is a lot of loss. Jennifer, what about you?
My only sibling, David, was on a motorcycle and in an accident, and in a coma for 3 weeks before he was extubated, and that was 40 years ago. Not quite 20 years later, my mother got pancreatic cancer. I was 18 when my brother died, and he was 13. And then my mom, not quite 20 years later, and then my husband, about almost 7 years ago, had cancer and died. And then just last year, my father died. And so I am the last one standing in my family, and that's been a remarkable adjustment. My dad and I, after a family loses a child, sometimes they come together and sometimes they come apart, and mine was more on the come apart side of things. My dad and I had a good relationship, but had to be long distance, right? And so when he got sicker and sicker, I was his long distance caregiver. And then when he died, I've been really stunned in the last year and a half by how it feels to be the last one standing.
It's kind of interesting because our number one visit at Open to Hope is adults losing children. Parents.
Yeah, adults losing parents.
Adult
parent loss.
people losing parents.
Right.
Is our number one visit.
Really?
Yes, I believe that, because it deals with the past self, right? The present self and the future self. I mean, it's all wrapped up when you lose your parents.
Well, for me, when my father died 3 years ago, one thing that resonated, what came up for me is that I'd never known my life without him. Like, he had been in my life since I was born. He's one of the reasons that I'm even here, and so that, and the idea that, oh my gosh, my parent is now dead, I'm next in line. It's like my own mortality to a certain extent.
Because they were both pretty positive and confident. Like they were my cheering section. So and even though they died 14 years apart, it was like that my mother was. So I missed that. I missed the first time when something happened and I wanted to call her and tell her.
Yeah, they're historians for one thing.
Right, and then they're always a good listener and encouragement, and that was difficult to do without. Yeah.
So my mom brought something up earlier which I liked at the beginning of the show. Do you think you've both had so many losses? You've had so many losses. I've had a lot of losses, but this is a whole nother level of loss. I'm wondering, did all these losses prepare you for the more recent losses? Does loss prepare us for other loss?
It did me. I'm not sure that my parents didn't prepare me for the loss of my older son, because you don't expect your children to predecease you. Or you do expect, even though you're not actively thinking about it, you do expect your parents to predecease you. So it didn't help with that, but the loss of my 21-year-old son, I think, did help me with other losses, including the loss of my husband, because it was so intense. And like I said, and my marriage fell apart afterwards, which was a loss as well. So that the intensity of all that made me, once I survived it, it felt like nothing could take me down.
Well, I felt, I'll have to say, when Scott died, I wasn't sure, and I work with a lot of parents who've lost kids. You're not sure if you're going to survive.
Oh, yeah.
Literally. You don't know if you can survive it. And people do die of heart attacks and strokes, and so, and I knew two things. I knew when my husband died, it was 40 years later, I knew that I would live and that I could be happy again. And I didn't know either of those things, when my son died.
Right.
It was funny, interesting rather, a few weeks before my dad had bad heart and lung disease, and it was a matter of time basically with him. And I'd been thinking a little bit about my own mortality. I found that quite a bit after my mother died and my husband, my dad. But anyway, I was walking across this bridge. I was on this long walk, and I was just kind of contemplating, when does it happen for me? And then I thought, no, it doesn't, because I have to stay alive until my father dies, right? I cannot predecease my dad when he's already lost his other kid. And then he died a few weeks later. And so, yes, I found myself, I have found myself in the last year and a half really contemplating, how long does it go on and how does it go, for me. But back to your question about comparative suffering, I think I relied on comparative suffering quite a bit in the early years after my brother died. I would sort of bolster myself with every difficult thing I faced and say, I lost my brother when I was 18, so nothing can hurt me. I can get through this, whatever it is. And it was helpful, but I'm not 100% sure that it was the most sort of solid way to help myself. It was a coping mechanism, but as I've gotten older, I have found that it's not as solid as it once was for me. And the other thing that you have to be really aware of when you do that internally is that you never do that externally, right? Because it's okay. It's kind of like I can talk about my own family, but my husband can't talk about my family, right? Kind of like that with comparative suffering. I can say, Jen, you've gotten through tougher stuff, but I'm not going to say, Heidi, you've gotten through tougher stuff, you can do that, because that's not very validating of your feelings. So
why is it not as effective now?
Perhaps because, why is it not so effective now? Well, there's been more loss, and it hurts a lot. I think my husband was probably, my brother and my husband were the ones that really hit hard.
You said something that I completely resonated with. So I was in a car accident in 2004, a very bad head-on collision, where I had a miscarriage. And when I was hit by head-on, the only thought I had was, I need to stay alive because my parents have already lost a child. Literally the only thought I had.
There's an incredible responsibility for survivor siblings, I think. I mean, it's with you all the time. In fact, it wasn't until my mother died 20 years after my brother that I really felt I grieved my brother in ways that I hadn't prior, because I spent the last 20 years of my mother's life trying to fill the hole in her heart, knowing I wouldn't. So that when she died, I could sort of, take a breath and realize, no, I really hadn't processed a lot of the stuff about my brother David. And to some degree when my dad died, my dad died almost 40 years after my brother, and I think I'd been carrying it, It was a little bit bigger when my mom died.
I think that you can only know the loss that you've had on that kind of level. People can talk about it, they can tell you. After my son was killed, I remember I was in private practice as a therapist, and people would come in and complain, because they broke up with their boyfriend, they lost their job and all that, and I'm like, and just one day it occurred to me, if you've had a hangnail, if that's all you've ever had, a hangnail is a hell of a deal.
Well, and I think that's why it's hard when you hear as a bereaved sibling that the death of a child is the worst loss you can ever experience, because I haven't had that experience. For me, the worst loss is the fact that I've lost my brother.
Right.
So, like you said, comparing losses is never beneficial to anybody.
It's just not useful.
I'm just wondering, with all these losses everyone has had, you all are positive people. So, I'm not saying all the time, because no one is, but I'm wondering how you do it and what's been helpful.
The one thing that's been really helpful for me, there's a lot of things, but the one biggest thing is in grieving the loss of my son, when I got to the point when I realized that his life was a gift, not just a loss, that was a huge turning point for me. And when I started thinking about it, okay, if you had a choice to never have known him or to have to go through it all over again, what would you do? And I would go through it all over again. So that was a big turning point for me. And after that, I stopped thinking about all the pain of the loss, and instead I'd start thinking about the mother-son trips and the first seat, riding the first seat of a roller coaster all day long, and when he talked me into a bungee jump. And that's what I think of it. So now when I think of him, I smile.
Yeah.
I don't get hung up so much in the pain, and that was very healing for me. So I try to do that with the other losses as well. It helps.
I think life is an existential journey. I mean, you're going to take all these losses with you. You're going to see what you do with them. I mean, it's never boring.
Yeah.
I can feel this emotion, I can feel that emotion, I can have this experience, I can have that experience. If I choose to, the opportunity comes. I mean, I've been able to do Open to Hope, and it's been a lot of fun with the family, and that all started out in honor of Scott.
Right.
So,
and I've met so many amazing people from all the work that I do with Resilience After Loss and the national conferences, and where I met you folks.
Right.
Yeah,
the people in this
people are
field are-
amazing when they've been through this kind of tragedy, because they get it.
You've
Yeah.
got your book and all the people you're meeting
I was
through
going
your
to say,
book.
Jennifer, what are your thoughts about how you've coped and what's worked?
Yeah, the same. I think you get to a point where you, at least after each loss, I have gotten to a point, there's a sort of a subtle pivot, and you start to feel this sense of, I want to help others.
Yeah.
It's actually,
Very healing.
it's healing. It's also almost a little selfish, to help others, because you're helping yourself so much in the process. But yes, publishing the journal, and then that helping so many other people that were caring for someone who was dying, or having just lost someone who had illness, that's been huge. And I've been lucky enough that also carries forward my late husband's legacy. So.
And I know your journaling and writing has been really therapeutic in your own healing.
Yes, and mine is art journaling.
Yeah.
So that's even, as far as I'm concerned,
So journaling, you can plant gardens. I mean, I think you have to find passion and purpose.
Absolutely.
What is your life for now? Who am I without that person in my life?
That's the hard part initially, because we're saying, well, it's amazing to be of service and do all these things, but initially, for me, the hard part was I had an identity loss. Who am I without my brother? And then later, who am I without my father? And so, like you said, figuring that out, it is an existential journey, right? And getting support from other people who have been through it is really key early on, I think.
Right, and hearing what they've done. Really starting out in the very beginning is you need to move the body, you need to drink water. I mean, there are those basic, things that you need to do to take care of yourself.
One of the things that helped me a lot after Bob died, because I really found that people would say it's just one day at a time, and sometimes an entire day is really insurmountable when you look ahead at it. But when you look back at it, so at the end of the day, I got myself in the habit of saying, you did it, Jen. You got through another day. And congratulating myself retrospectively on the day, rather than looking ahead and going, I don't know how I'm going to get to tonight, So yeah, you're right.
I like
Just
that.
Eating
Setting
and moving.
smaller goals sometimes too.
Right.
Instead of saying the whole day, maybe it's what am I going to do in the next half an hour?
Right. And then at the end of the day going, yay
Giving
me,
yourself
I
a-
did it.
And I remember the distinct feeling of thinking, somehow I knew helping others would help me heal. And so starting the chapter and being with people, and we were all
The
crying over
Compassionate Friends
things.
chapter.
And then,
Yep.
then the book, the memoir, but then the Faces of Resilience, the photo shoots, because I get to talk to these people, and they tell me about all the stuff they've gone through, and then they're expressing themselves, and I get to write it on their skin, and it washes off. People think, was that a tattoo? No, it washes right off. But, and then send it to them, and it's just such a cathartic process for all of us,
Right.
Yes.
everybody involved.
It's powerful.
It's
I remember when you got all the siblings together and did one with the
Yeah.
siblings and Compassionate Friends. It was powerful.
Peer support is important. I think that is one of the problems with adults losing parents. It's kind of a lot. I don't know of any groups for adults losing parents. They're widow groups, they're child
there's
groups.
the general grief groups.
But you don't see that. Yeah, you could.
Well, I mean, some of them, I'm sorry, I just, no, it's okay. A lot of the parents that were in my chapter would say, the only grief group I can find is a general grief group, and it's people that are losing parents, and I can't relate to that because I've lost a child. So I think there's some general, maybe through hospitals and churches and things, but.
And there are some great books
they're
out there,
not-
like
they're not named,
Motherless
I bet.
Daughters with
Yeah.
Hope Edelman.
Yeah.
But I agree, there's not specific organizations, it doesn't seem like.
Well, especially for that losing your parents at like the age I
Yes.
am now, right?
Yes,
Because it's standard
Right.
at a certain age to lose your parents. It's
Well, and sometimes people will
expected.
say, you know, your father had a good life. He lived his life fully. And I said, I understand that, and I'm really happy about that. But that doesn't make me miss him any less.
Right. Right. When you love someone, it's too soon, right?
Yeah.
Whether
Yeah,
they're
doesn't matter how old
150
they are.
years old, it's too soon.
Yeah, and it
Because
also depends on how close you were to, how often you saw them, and we know all that kind of thing. But also, if you had an ambivalent relationship with them that you thought you were going to be able to work out.
Yes.
Right.
That's tough.
That was also very
I thought we had
connecting.
more time.
Either the closeness or the, the problem relationship,
One of the methodologies that I teach focuses on undelivered communications. Exactly for that reason. Whether the relationship was great and you missed some of the future, or that it was bad and you missed the opportunity to make it better. There's a lot of undelivered communications that hang you up in your
And so
grief,
what can you
and releasing
do
that.
if you're watching this show and saying, I have unfinished business with someone that I thought was going to be here and they suddenly died? What would you suggest that they do?
It's an evidence-based methodology called grief recovery method, but the
Okay.
point of it is it's got tools, and it leads you to the point where you're doing a loss history graph and then a relationship graph, and then you're going deep and you're looking for things that didn't get said that might be apologies or forgivenesses or other emotional statements, and then you read those in the form of a letter and get witnessed
I like
and
it.
say goodbye to it. So it's an action-based thing.
I like it. I like the idea of writing a letter.
And
Yeah.
it's all been kind of proven over time, and it is evidence based. So it's
writing and having people know, and I like the idea of witnessed.
that's
So that it
the
kind
powerful
of
part.
takes us out of the innards and
it has to be witnessed.
puts it out there, on
I
the
would
table.
love to see organizations, corporations, employers become more grief literate.
Yes.
There's just such a lack of grief literacy in our society. I would just love to see that.
Well, for corporations, it takes time.
Yeah.
Time is money.
Yeah.
And
But-
if you sit and talk to somebody, I know,
right, except
and
that
you
the
know
loss
that-
of productivity
illness
someone said
and all
something
that.
silly to you is
Yeah.
significant.
That's been preached so long, and everybody knows, and there's evidence on it, how many people miss work, but we have friends who've written books for corporations, want to go in and work there and try to get them to hire you. It's
it's disappointing.
a tough road. Yeah.
Well, and I think shows like this really build awareness. Because I think it's very easy for people to minimize losses or want you to speed through it in a year. I'm just wondering what piece of advice you would give people out there that have had multiple losses and might be saying, okay, who's next now? Or is this my life now? Or I can't handle this anymore. People keep dying on me in my life. I mean, I can't deal with this. It's too much. What would you say?
I think my first thing is trust yourself and make a choice to heal, and then reach out and look for things that work for you and keep an open mind about that. So rather than listening to too much advice, because every loss is unique and nobody knows better than you, trust your gut about what might work and just keep trying some things and see what works, right? There's no magic bullet. It's not fast or easy, but you try things and it gets better and you chip away at it, and that with time it gets better and gets more hopeful. Have hope.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I think all of those reactions are totally legitimate, and I would say, I recognize it when it's happening, whatever it is, whether it's am I next or I can't stand to outlive another person I love. Recognize it. Recognize that it's perfectly normal. There's nothing wrong with you because you're having those feelings all over the place, and then once you've done those two things, trying to sort of do some self-care and manage it effectively. The first two are the most important for me because I tend to let things get a little crazy in my head and then think there's something wrong with me. But there's not. I mean, other than the obvious. No, I'm kidding. No, there's nothing wrong with all of those thoughts and feelings. It's perfectly natural, and
So it's self-compassion.
Yes, yes, yes.
You know, I'll say, I think you need to sometimes look at what helped you in the past. How did you get through in the past? And it may be going back to the religion of your childhood.
Sure.
That may be what's comforting. What comforted you in your life? And maybe some things that you forgot about, and, you know, it may be some kind of a sport or something that you enjoyed, or, you know, think about doing some things for yourself and going back.
Yeah,
and
one of the
looking.
things that surprised me was journaling. Because my son, I had never kept a diary, and my remaining son, who never, when it wasn't a book kid at all, went and bought me a leather-bound refillable journal, and because he did, I started using it. Well, 8 journals later, that became the basis for my memoir.
Wow.
But regardless of what you do with it, I was amazed at how cathartic it was. You could write down the good, the bad, and the ugly. Nobody ever has to see it. You can burn it if you want to.
Yeah.
But it was very cathartic.
I love this, and similar to what Jennifer did. If people want to find you, where can they find you?
abutterfliesjourney.org is my website, and it's possessive, not plural, so it's FLYS. And then 617-410-6309. Or info@abutterfliesjourney.org.
Okay. Great, Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, mine is hospicedoctorswidow.com, and either DRS or doctors spelled out, and there's a contact page on that website. And there's some resources, some really great resources on the resources page too. So, yeah.
Great. And I guess we'll close the show now by talking about where you can find us and our new book. At Open to Love, The Secrets of Senior Dating is our new book. It'll be released on Valentine's Day, and you can pre-order it at Open to Hope or at thedatingdoctors.com. And Heidi and I want to thank you for joining us on this show today.
I just want to say that, you know, there is hope after loss. Every single person sitting here has been through multiple losses. We know how hard it is. We know how painful it is. And like Jennifer said earlier, just do it 1 minute at a time if you have to. And as we always say, Mom?
Yep. If you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.
The loss of a loved one can leave you feeling depressed, angry, alone, lost. But you don't have to face this journey on your own. Open to Hope is a free community for anyone who has experienced loss. Find support. Find help. Find hope. Give grief a voice at opentohope.com.